So I have my sketches from the Museum of Working Life, and I'm going to demonstrate making an oil sketch from one of these. I'm going to go for the seamstress, and I want to try a couple of things that I'd mentioned. The idea of working with the oil sketch really being a way of, on a small scale, working with the image to manipulate the image to create a particular effect. And with the theme that we have this time, the main effects I want to achieve are to make the hands really feature, so to draw attention to the hands, and in conjunction with that, making the hands both believable but also simplified in a way that fits with the rest of the composition. So I'm going to work with my seamstress. I think that I'm going to try two effects in the same painting. One is to use tone and light to draw attention to the hands or to lose other parts of the painting. So I've done that a little bit in the sketch. I've put the figure a little bit more in the shadows, and also there's a hint of something in the background. And I'm going to bring the hands into the light with the drape, the piece of material in her hands. And to that end, I'm starting on a kind of mid-tone ground. I've just put on some burnt umber, and I'm now going to sketch out my subject. So I could go either way with this composition, but I'm going to go for landscape, because I think that will allow me to make a real feature of the material, which are going to lead into the hands. So I'm starting with a wonderful, does it say it's sable? It's a synthetic, soft, thin brush. What number? I think it's number 1. So that is great for just drawing out lines with some fairly fluid burnt umber. So it's nice to have this kind of drawing underneath. I'll be blocking in paint with either with bigger brushes or with pieces of card, but it's nice to have this kind of fluid start. So as I did in the drawing, I'm going to exaggerate the size of the hands a little bit. So I want to have that kind of possibly monumental quality of the head a bit smaller because it's further away, a bit high up, and the hands or the figure gradually getting bigger, and particularly the hands, which are what I wanted to feature. And then the other way in which I want to draw attention to, another way that I'm going to draw attention to the hands, is by having this material in the seamstress's hands sort of leading up to the hands. And as well as that, I'm going to work a bit with colour. So this head and figure is all going to be fairly warm, not too much colour because of emerging from the sort of shadowy background. And then I'll use something a bit cooler, maybe a sort of a blue or a green in the material in her hands. So I'm using tone to lose things and to harmonize things, light on the hands in particular, and then the cooler color in the material. So various devices, if you like, with which I'm going to draw attention to the hands. So maybe one more point before I block in a bit of colour. I think the simplifying of the hands, I can start doing it now. I've got a certain amount of information in my drawing. I had a line for the knuckle, and then fingers gripping the material a little bit in shadow, and this hand, which actually I made up, has got a thumb, and then the material, oh, and a knuckle. So let's get the corner there. So that's more or less what I'll do for that stage, and I'll mix up a bit of colour and start blocking in. So because I don't want the figure to stand out particularly strongly, in my choice of colours I'm staying fairly close to the brown ground that I began with. A bit of colour like this will help solidify the figure, but it won't make it stand out too much yet, and if I want it to stand out more, then I can brighten the colour or brighten the light. So in order to, I'm staying close to the brown, and one way of doing that actually is to mix some colours and then add the brown to them, so that they're always pulled back closer to what's there. So I'm just blocking in some hair, a little bit darker. Always good to do hair and ear to orientate the head a bit. If the hair is dark, that's helpful. Then I've made some colours for the face. I had done a little bit of drawing there. You can see some lines for features, so I'm working around them a bit. I may restate them again afterwards. But the colours that I've made for the face are a little bit more muted, so that the face won't stand out too much. Try a light a bit. A little bit of light on the forehead maybe. Some on the nose. I'm also working a bit wet in wet here. So those colours will mix. So I want to have a little bit of form to the face, but by contrast, with the hands, I'm using a bit more colour. Go down to the fingers, and more light. So I'm managing the light and the amount of colour between the hands and the face. Let's see, I'll get all these down just to see whether they are what I wanted them to be, and I can always change them a bit. A lot of paint there. Let's get that a bit cleaner. Yeah, so just to make that distinction, as I said, using the light to get a bit more attention on the hands, and I'm going to make something for the cloth. So this is all a little bit provisional because I have my ideas about managing the light and the colour, but it's only really once I get some of these colours down that I can see whether it's going to work. And the point for me of doing the oil sketch is that because it's small, it's very easy to make, or much easier to make changes, adjustments. So I need to get these colours down to see how they work, and if I've mixed them on my palette in reasonable quantities, if they're almost right, I just have to adjust them. If they're way off, well then, I've got to do a bit more mixing and thinking. Well, that was my darker colour, and as I've said, I've gone for something which is going to really contrast with all the warm ground that I began on, and the colours in the clothing that the seamstress is wearing, and the colours in the background. And then there's an extra sort of smaller adjustment to see how I can very specifically draw attention to the hands. So I think the next stage is very important, and it involves a lot of standing back and considering, seeing what adjustments to make. I've decided that actually the hair was just a bit too dark. That gives the kind of emphasis. But I would like a little bit more dark in her clothing, just to make sense of that. Whilst I'm wanting to lose the head and some of the figure of the seamstress, let it merge a bit with the background. I don't want it to be completely disappeared, and if people look to that part of the painting, I want them to be able to see, to be satisfied with what they see. So that's a little bit more modelling there. I'll do a tiny bit more to the face. But then more specifically to the hands, I think to bring these hands out, as ever, it's very often negative shape. So I'm going to work a bit with the brush to put some shadows on the cloth. Maybe get a little bit more work with the fingers or the grip. And there's a bit to fill in here as well. But again, this is very often how it works with hands. Just one or two bits of emphasis, either within the hand or very often within the negative shape. So I think that might have helped a little bit there. And we might have just one or two more lines. There's more to do, but I'm trying to pick out certain things to demonstrate how attention can be directed more and more to the hands. So there's a bit to fill in up here as well. And if I've got these colours, I've got my lighter blue cloth colour, that's almost a bit too much. Should play it down. I've got my colours mixed on the palette, then turning up or turning down an effect can be relatively quick and easy. So that's that. I would like to just do a little bit more to that background. So I thought I'd develop the background actually using a brush, partly because the value of, as I've said, of putting on the paint with the card is that you use more paint. So my figure is just a little bit more substantial than the background because there's more paint. If I use the brush, I can spread it out, and I want to calm that down a bit, and this is a little bit too dark. So there's some adjustments to make to that in order to get the balance right. So again, I'm just experimenting really with the sort of level that I'm pitching the background at. I don't want it to completely disappear. And also I want it to be interesting enough, but not too interesting, not too distracting. So I'm just adjusting that background colour and effectively making the background a bit more opaque, which will bring the figure forward. But I don't want the figure to come forward too much. So this, again, as I say, this is where it gets, well, hopefully interesting and easy to manipulate, so that you don't feel too daunted by putting something in or taking something out, by brightening colours, dulling colours, and so on. So there's more to do to that, because poor woman is just in a kind of dark prison cell. So I might have to develop that a bit further, but I'm happy enough with the way she's coming on, with this emphasis on the hands, using the material. The blue might be a bit too strong. But these are the sorts of things that I want to keep adjusting to get the particular balance between the main subject, and in this case it's really the hands, the working hands, and then other secondary elements in the composition. Okay, so I hope that's helpful, and see some of you in the studio on Monday. Bye-bye.